to the Metal Voice. Today on the show, Mr. John Bush, lead singer of Armored Saint. They have a new album out called Win Hands Down. John, how you doing?
What's happening, Jimmy? How are you, bud?
Great. Before we get into your exciting new album, Win Hands Down, let's go back in time a bit, okay? I want to go back, touch on, a little bit of the Armored Saint years, Anthrax, and we'll build up right to the new album.
Okay.
All right, you're a young band. You guys are high school friends or even elementary school friends, growing up in the Los Angeles area, I would assume. You put together Armored Saint, you come out with your first EP. Can you tell me how you financed this? Was it with your parents? Was it, money that you guys saved up?
The financing of that is actually an interesting story. We were doing a show up in a place here in the suburbs of Los Angeles called Mount Baldy. It's a ski lodge, ski slope area. Not so good, but it's still pretty fairly popular.
Yeah.
And we played a show up there where you had to take a ski lift to get to the show. And it was not a good show. It was poorly attended. It was probably pretty lame to even play in. But we did play nevertheless. And one of the few people who attended the show was Tommy Lee. Tommy and Joey Vera, the bass player of Armored Saint, were in a band before Armored Saint together. And so he came up to see us. And after the show, they took off to go party and go somewhere. They drove down the hill, and we all stayed up at the ski lodge. That was the plan. They ended up getting in a car accident. They rolled the car that they were in. Joey was in the back of it. There was a kind of a rear window that was slanted, and he was back there, and it shattered all over his hands.
Wow.
So his hands were all cut up. Next thing we know, we get a call the next day, or somebody called home, and they said, Joey's in the hospital, and his hands are all cut up. We're like, what? So it turned out he was going to be fine, but he did obviously have an injury, and he had some kind of insurance settlement that paid for the recovery of his hands, and also he got some extra money. And from that extra money, he decided to pay for the demo.
That's
of the
crazy.
Yeah, and the funny thing is actually it's in the book The Dirt from Motley Crue, and Vince talks about it, but Vince gets it wrong. He says that they were on a motorcycle, which was not true at all. They were in a car. So it just goes to show you that some of the stuff you read is, wherever the source is, it may not be accurate.
The record has been set straight, my friend.
The record is straight.
At what point did you guys start, and I don't know if this is true or not, they were jousting on stage? I didn't live in the LA area, so was there jousting on stage and armor and the whole image? You started building that image.
We played one show to kind of honor our success and our impending record that was going to be coming out, March of the Saint, the title track, and the record. And so we played one show at a place called Perkins Palace, which is in the Pasadena area of Los Angeles. We sold it out. It was probably like 2,200 people capacity. It was overpacked. And that was kind of our way of honoring our fans and saying we have a new record deal and we're making this album and it's coming out at the end of the year. And we wanted to do something special, and that's when we did the two jousting nights on stage. Me and one of my best friends who, sadly enough, unfortunately, had passed away about 10 years ago. One of my best friends, Andy, who we actually reference on this new record on the song Muscle Memory. It was one of my best friends in life. Very sad moment for him to lose his life. And but we had this thing where we were battling on stage. We recorded this audio, and that was the one and only time we ever did it. But it is you can see it on YouTube if you type March of the St. Perkins Palace 1984. It probably will pop up.
Cool.
But we only did it the one time.
You March of the Saints, the album comes out, you have a minor hit, or, at least on MTV and Much Music in Canada. Can you deliver? Some good success with the first album.
Yes, no doubt.
But I was reading online that you're still in debt for this album. Is there any truth to this?
Oh yeah, because the record ended up costing so much money. I think we probably I'm speculating here because I really don't know the exact figure at this point, but I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of about $350,000. We were 20 years old. We didn't know any better. We were just kind of going with the flow, and it was an awesome moment, and we were riding the wave. So as time went by, we realized, whoa, we spent a lot of money on that record, and hence we never, ever recouped. We made the adjustment as records went on, like Delirious Nomad, I think, was half that amount of money, and I think Raising Fear was half the amount of money of Delirious Nomad. So we made the adjustments, but by that point, we were so far in debt that we just were never going to get out.
Wow. So the corporation, let's call it Armored Saints, still owes money for that first album to the record label, I guess?
Yeah, we still owe. We don't get any royalties from those first 3 records. Luckily enough, we were smart with publishing. We did take a publishing advance for the first album, but we ended up, by recommendation of our management at the time, saying, they said, don't take any more publishing advances. You'll never, ever recoup. Yeah. So we did for the next 2 records, and you know what? We're in the black with publishing. So for probably the last, 15 years, we've been receiving royalties for those records, publishing-wise.
You're offered the job as a singer of Metallica. But what did it ever get to more than that? Was there ever a jam session? Like you had one jam session to decide, or you wrote some songs together?
No, I never got to that point. I used to get calls from Johnny Zazula, who was Johnny Z, was Megaforce Records, which ironically enough, he called me 10 years later and then asked me about Anthrax, which was really a bizarre, strange, ironic circumstance. But, I think it was before Kill 'Em All was officially recorded, and they were obviously considering getting a singer. Armored Saint was starting to escalate in the Los Angeles scene for sure, getting more and more popular. Obviously, we knew Metallica, and we ended up going and playing a bunch of shows with Metallica before the infamous Metallica Wasp tour that we did when we came to Montreal. But, I think that for me, it was an easy decision to make because Armored Saint was becoming popular. And all the guys in Armored Saint and I, we grew up together. We were friends since we were like 8 or 9 years old, for the most part. And as much as we respected Metallica, of course, it didn't make sense for me to go, well, I'm going to go quit my band that I'm in with all my friends to go join this other band. I always make the joke, I would have changed the whole face of heavy metal, and I don't need that kind of pressure.
Okay, so you guys are off to Delirious Nomad and Raising Fear. I mean, what was the vibe like in at the boardroom at the record company? I mean, were they happy? Were they weren't happy? Artistically, you guys, I'm sure you were happy. The records sound great, right? But what was the vibe like at the record company?
The funny thing is we ended up making 3 records on a major record company, and without really having a ton of success, and nothing like a gold record or a platinum record. So to do that, I still think that was kind of an accomplishment, considering the fact that probably every record from Mars to Delirious to Raising Fear probably sold fewer copies than the previous ones.
Then, Symbol of Salvation, Revelation, the passing of Dave Pritchard. Then you get, a call, right? You get the call to join Anthrax. I mean, your first instinct, you get the call. It was a big yes, or I have to think about this. I mean, of course. Go ahead.
I had to think about it because once again, I know it sounds cheesy possibly, but there was a real strong loyalty, and there still is to this day. It's obviously quite prevalent with Armored Saint. And I think the history of the band members goes so far back to, again, when we were children. Literally, we were in the 8 years old when we became friends, and that friendship pretty much remained. So, without sounding too corny, it was hard to say, well, I'm leaving, because we had just made Symbol of Salvation, and we thought it was a great record, and it was a lot of emotion that went into just making that record with Dave's illness, and then he ended up dying. So I didn't probably like the idea that I was leaving the band and kind of abandoning the band. But I had to. It was just, we had kind of, the results were fairly similar to what we had accomplished before. So it was just time. It was time for me to move on. And even though I was kind of having possible second thoughts, I spoke to a couple friends, and they were going, dude, don't be stupid. And I said, yeah, I guess you're right. I think it was important for me to make sure that in Anthrax I was a part of the whole songwriting process. I was always a lyric writer, Armored Saint, and I didn't want to go and just kind of be told what to do. I had heard that that's how they had worked with Joey. Nothing disrespectful at all, but he was kind of given lyrics and said, these are what you're doing, and this is how you're singing. And And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be part of the process of creating because it was important. And, the first thing we did is we tried to write, and we wrote only in about an hour, and I think that was pretty obvious that was a good working relationship.
For myself, I think Sound of White Noise and We've Come For You All have to be probably two of the best, Anthrax albums, at least in my opinion.
They're great records. They're great records.
They're great records. But do you ever feel, and I feel for you on this, that somehow the industry, the timing, you got shortchanged? I mean, here are these gems, and the world, I mean, they did well. Don't get me wrong. The albums did well, but they could have done better. That's what I'm getting at. Do you ever feel shortchanged there?
I don't feel shortchanged about anything. Armored Saint, Anthrax, nothing. Because it's just, I don't want to live like that. It's not good for me to live like that. I certainly, I'm not laying in bed at night going, God, I should be more popular. I do make the joke sometimes when I'm, like, I have a die-hard fan come up to me and they'll bring me like 30 records that I've made, and I sign them, and then I laugh, and I was like, you would think I have more money than I do. All of these records, because there's so many. But that's just a joke that I kind of say to myself.
No regrets, but I mean, it must have burned, right? I mean, we're only human, right? I mean, they tell you they're going to do a reunion tour with Joey. I saw that tour too. I love Anthrax, all versions. But it must, because Joey was isolated when he was in the band, right? And you were part of their core, songwriting-wise and probably friendship-wise, right?
I don't. What hurt most is that the relationship I had with those guys and have is we're very close. The personal relationships I had with every individual, Scott, Frankie, Charlie, was all kind of different, and yet I was pretty close to all of them in my own way. I think that it could have probably been handled a little bit better. We had this manager at the time who, was just he was just not a good person in the sense of being there for us, and I mean us, not just them, but
sure.
Us. Because, he created this kind of wedge, and it shouldn't have come to that, because if those guys would have came to me and said, we're considering doing a reunion tour, we think it's the right time. I'm sorry, I would have been like, I understand. I probably would have just said that, I understand. But it was the rumors were already circulating. We were still touring. We were in South America, and people were asking questions about it because they had heard about it. And then those guys were like trying to deny it as we were doing like interviews together. And I'm going, and I knew. So I was going, this is kind of lame, because, it would have been better if we're finishing this tour and then they're going to do that. And it would have just been much more straight up. About it. But does that bother me at this point?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, you got to move on, right?
It's water under the bridge now. It doesn't matter. Me and Scott, we speak a lot. I haven't talked to Charlie and Frankie, and it's kind of sad. It got a little weirder later, and there were some people's feelings that were hurt about decisions that were made.
Yeah.
But, it's like, man, we went through a long period of time. I was in Anthrax for almost 13 years. We made a lot of music together. So, again, I don't care. It doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't. It's just not. As a matter of fact, I'd probably entertain, Armored Saint opening for Anthrax.
Well, there you go.
Like, I do love the music I made in Anthrax, and I actually would prefer them to play a couple songs. I really wish they would, but I understand why they don't, and I understand why Joey probably is not so embracing of that idea, and I get it. I hold nothing personal about that whatsoever.
Let's get into the present now. Win hands down. I got to tell you, right off the bat, probably your best album by far. It's got a lot of depth to it, interesting lyrics, and the playing from the vocals to the guitars, to the drums, to the bass, phenomenal. Can you tell me, tell me your favorite song or one of your favorite tracks off the album?
Well, first, thanks for all those nice words. I think it's an amazing record too. I think we really kind of it's pretty awesome to say after all these years that there seems to be that kind of feeling behind it that maybe it's the best record we ever did, which is quite an accomplishment because we are a band 30 years later. So that says a lot, actually. Certainly, it's not really for me to decide if I think. Yeah, of course, I have my own personal feelings, but when you say that and when others do, that's obviously pretty cool.
Because my word matters there, John. My word matters in the world.
It does. So I don't know. I think that we just kind of, for us, the whole general feeling was to be able to take what we do and to take it a step beyond. And not that, I mean, I'm sure all bands think that. Nobody's saying, hey, let's just do the same thing every time record. Let's just mail it in. I mean, of course, I'm not saying anything that's that profound. Obviously, everybody strives to do that, I think. But we did it. You know, we kind of said we want to take the songwriting and make it bigger, and we want to make, you know, we want to get deeper into certain, you know, lyrical content, and we want to, you know, take the guitar playing and push it further, and, you know, not really have any kind of limitations as to what we can and cannot do. And, you know, knowing full aware that we are what we are, a hard rock, heavy metal band. Super proud of that. You know, I feel like our roots are super strong, and so with that known, we feel like we could have just embellished it and kind of not create any limitations as to what we could try to do. And with that state of mind, that's why the record came out the way it did, and that's why it's as cool as it is, I think.
Well, there you have it. John Bush, Win Hands Down is a new album by Armored Saint. Everybody should go pick it up. It's a must. John, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was a good conversation.
Great conversation. We talked about everything. We talked about Anthrax, Armored Saint, hockey. It was great.
Thank you very much. Sunday morning. Hey, you can move on.
All right, thanks for being on the show.